You are listening to the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast. Hi, this is Shane Vander. Welcome back to another episode, and happy belated New Year. I didn't realize it was going to be so long before I got a podcast episode recorded for 2019, but good to be back into a new year. We've got a lot of news to cover. I have an interview with State Senator Randy Feenstra. But before all that, first a word from our sponsor, American Principles Project.
At American Principles Project, we believe that human dignity should be at the heart of public policy. We work in all 50 states and in Washington, D.C. to promote life, religious freedom, local control over education, authentic economic progress for working Americans, and a return to constitutional principles such as federalism. Want to help American Principles Project? Visit our website today, AmericanPrinciplesProject.org. That's American Principles, P-L-E-S, project.org. Sign up for email updates. Help us out. We want to work with you. That's AmericanPrinciplesProject.org.
And we're back. Congressman Steve King has been in the news this week, and he's the center of national spotlight once again after a New York Times report quotes him as seemingly defending white nationalism and white supremacy. During an interview with the New York Times, King asked, white nationalists, white supremacists, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? Why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? Unquote. The article written by Trip Gabriel, New York Times, notes that King, during the interview, said that he is not racist and he supports legal immigration. He pointed to his Twitter, he encouraged the reporter to look at his Twitter timeline that has pictures of him with different immigrants and different people of different races visiting his office. He released a statement after the article published disavowing white nationalism and white supremacy and stood by his defense of Western civilization. He said, quote, "Today, the New York Times is suggesting that I am an advocate for white nationalism and white supremacy. I want to make one thing abundantly clear. I reject those labels and the evil ideology that they define. Further, I condemn anyone that supports this evil and bigoted ideology, which saw in its ultimate expression the systematic murder of 6 million innocent Jewish lives. It's true that, like the Founding Fathers, I am an advocate for Western civilization's values, that I profoundly believe that America is the greatest tangible expression of these ideals the world has ever seen. Under any fair political definition, I am simply a nationalist. America's values are expressed in our founding documents, and they are attainable by everyone, and we take pride that people of all races, religions, and creeds from around the globe aspire to achieve them. I'm dedicated to keeping America this way. This conviction does not make me a white nationalist or a white supremacist. Once again, I reject those labels and the ideology that they define. As I told the New York Times, it's not about race. It's never been about race. One of my most strongly held beliefs is that we are all created in God's image and that human life is sacred in all of its forms. One thing that kind of drove me nuts about this article, Gabriel basically suggests that Congressman King is the origin of support for, or basically the origin of the idea of having a wall on the border, and that's not true. Also, they make a statement that basically they link Western civilization with saying you only support culture brought from, and this is a literal quote, based on the values by Gabriel, not Congressman King, based on the values brought to the United States by whites from Europe. Now, I have in the past defended Congressman King's defense of Western civilization because I agree it's not about race. It's a culture, a set of values, literature, philosophy, and the like. It's our founding documents are based on a lot of these things. And that's helped craft the United States and what it has become as a nation. Now, there's no denying that. I mean, we have, as a nation, have had shared values which transcend race. And that's the beautiful thing about it. It transcends race. It transcends creed. It transcends uh, everybody who comes here can be part of the American dream and experience and have this shared experience. Now that said, it'd be wrong to say the United States has been influenced only by the West and has not welcomed other cultures. We've never truly been a melting pot. We do have influence from a variety of different cultures, but there's no denying the influence of the West. Now, that said, this is not just a white experience. Mexico has been just as influenced by Western civilization as the United States has. So, because their origins are from Spain. I mean, that's to paint this into a racial thing, I think is disingenuous, and that's been discouraging. Also, the particular discussion surrounding Western civilization has generally centered around two things. One, the rise of secular humanism, as well as the Muslim migration in Europe and the problems that are associated with that. That are often downplayed by the left, and I fully admit sometimes those problems are overstated by the right as well. What would be wonderful is if we could have an honest conversation about this without name calling and labels. Congressman King has not been necessarily the best spokesperson for this, but the left has also been unwilling to have a good faith discussion. Um, I Congressman King's statement doesn't fully explain why he said what he said, but we don't, we don't have the full context. We don't know what he was asked. But I will say it's a disappointing statement, and I'm I wish that he would come up, that there would be an explanation, and it was at best a very clumsy statement. And this is something that has been a pattern. National Review wrote a fairly harsh editorial, basically titled "Dump Steve King." The editors of National Review wrote, and they've noted something that I've noted over the last few months, especially after President Trump was elected. They wrote, quote, "Over the last several months, the congressman has compiled a distressing record endorsing the political campaign of a protest candidate for mayor of Toronto who appeared on a white supremacist podcast and has repeated white supremacist mantras, approvingly citing white nationalists on social media, and when pressed, refusing to admit error, and nodding to fringe tropes such as cultural suicide by demographic transformation that reduce a legitimate issue of national cohesion to an ugly exercise in racial bean counting. King has portrayed himself as a victim of manufactured controversies by the media, but the onus is on politicians to be precise with their language and responsible with their associations on these issues." That's the money quote right there. I know it's no secret that I know Congressman King. And I'm going to say something that I have not said that I've said to him personally. It is vitally, vitally important that he disassociates with himself from anybody that has latched on to white supremacy or white nationalism. He needs to be careful with what he says. I don't even think he should refer to himself as a nationalist. In his mind, that means patriot. Unfortunately, nationalism, while there's a variety of different expressions worldwide with nationalism, it's not necessarily racially based. But here in the United States and in Europe, it's mostly associated with white nationalism. He needs to distance himself from that. I would encourage him, and I have encouraged him publicly, to focus on issues within the 4th District, to make sure he connects with his constituents. Things like this are a distraction to the work that he needs to be doing. Now, as far as what the National Review editors say, dump Steve King, that's obviously going to be up to the voters of the 4th Congressional District, and he does, because of the last few months, he's earned himself a contested primary. State Senator Randy Feenstra threw his hat in the ring, and I'm going to interview him I interviewed him today, and I'll be playing that interview a little bit later in the podcast. I think whether this, regardless of the last few months, I'm just going to, my general belief about contested primaries is that they're healthy for the incumbent, they're healthy for the party, and they're good for constituents because constituents need to have a choice. I just think they keep everybody sharp and they keep a discussion going. It's good to have. So I think this contested primary is good, regardless of what Congressman King has done in the last few months. Even if he's been even if he'd been without controversy, I think contested primaries are a good thing for the party and for incumbents. So anyway, I'm disappointed by the turn of events. He still has a lot of explaining to do. He needs to make some serious adjustments in his media presence, as well as his public, what he says publicly. I would encourage him to just totally back away from this conversation because he's not precise with his language. He's not been very careful, and I think he's done more harm than good. So that would be my encouragement to him. So I think the Editor's National Review, when again they're talking about the onus is on politicians to be precise with their language and responsible with their associations on these issues, that is abundantly true. And I really hope Congressman King would take that to heart. So moving on, exasperated, this is an article from Politico, exasperated Democrats try to rein in Ocasio-Cortez. I have to say, part of me is kind of amused by this. This is written by Rachel Bade and Heather Cagle. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. Quote, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is already making enemies in the House Democratic Caucus, and some of its members are mounting an operation to bring the anti-establishment Democratic Socialist with 2.2 million Twitter followers into the fold. The effort, described by nearly 20 lawmakers and aides, is part carrot, part stick. Some lawmakers with ties to Ocasio-Cortez are hoping to coax her into using her star power to unite Democrats and turn her fire on Republicans. Others simultaneously warn Ocasio-Cortez is destined for a lonely and ineffectual career in Congress if she continues to treat her own party as the enemy. I'm sure Ms. Cortez means well, but there's almost an outstanding rule: don't attack your own people, said Representative Emanuel Cleaver. He's a Democrat out of Missouri. We don't need sniping in our Democratic caucus. Incumbent Democrats are most annoyed by Ocasio-Cortez's threat to back primary opponents against members of their ranks she deems too moderate. But their frustration goes beyond that. Democratic leaders are upset that she railed against their new set of House rules on Twitter the first week of the new Congress. Rank and file are peeved that there's a grassroots movement to try to win her a top committee post they feel she doesn't deserve. So, anyway, I find that amusing. Obviously, we've had similar things on the right, so I think it's refreshing to see the Democratic Party wrestle with stuff like this. She's definitely she's a maverick, very, very thoroughly liberal. So, but yeah, you never know. She's out there. You never know what she's going to say. But you know what? It's kind of their own fault because they're the ones that kind of put her in the spotlight. So, sorry, not sorry. Ruth Bader Ginsburg shows no evidence of remaining disease, Supreme Court says. This is an article from CNN today. It says, quote, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's recovery from surgery is on track, but she will miss oral arguments next week, the Supreme Court announced Friday. Ginsburg is still recuperating from surgery to remove 2 cancerous nodules from her lungs. Post-surgery evaluation indicates no evidence of remaining disease and no further treatment is required, said court spokesman Kathleen Arberg. Ginsburg, 85, who missed oral arguments this week, has not been on the bench since her surgery last month, but she has participated by reading briefs at home. Her absence comes as the court is considering whether to take up several controversial issues, including the administration's decision to phase out the deferred action for childhood arrivals program and this ban that blocks most transgender individuals from serving the military. The justices met behind closed doors earlier on Friday to discuss pending petitions, and Ginsburg participated by proxy. So I think that Justice Ginsburg will, she's going to stay on the court till she dies, or is at some point unable to fulfill her duties. I hope she has enough integrity if she's not able to fulfill her duties that she will step down off the court, regardless of who's in the White House. But I think the Trump administration, there were news articles this week about the Trump administration making preparations for a vacancy by RBG. Probably a little premature, probably some wishful thinking. Not to say it's not going to happen. Look, I'm no fan of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I'm not going to wish her ill will, and I certainly hope she does recover. I just hope that maybe she'll decide just to have a nice retirement. That would be good. I'd be okay with that. So, but she's going to be on till she's not, and I think she's going to try to hold onto the court as long as humanly possible. So I wouldn't expect a vacancy anytime soon. That's my feeling. Obviously, I'm not in control. Nobody's in control of that, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So then we have Jim Acosta. Oh, Jim Acosta. He loves himself some Jim Acosta. He decided to go down to the border of McAllen, Texas, to check out whether or not there's going to be there was a situation down there worthy of a national emergency. I will say this: I disagree with President Trump declaring a national emergency in order to justify putting up a wall on the border and taking funds to do that. I think that would be inappropriate. I think that would be an executive overreach. I think, frankly, I mean, if he does that, what's to stop a Democratic president down the road declaring a national emergency for health care or for abortion funding or for a number of things? It's a horrible precedent to set. We need to reduce and shrink the imperial presidency and put a check on the executive branch, not expand it. I wasn't happy when President Obama expanded the executive branch. Certainly not happy when President Trump does it either. So I like to be consistent that way. But Jim Acosta, he basically proved President Trump's point that walls work. Here's the audio of that.
And here are some of the steel slats that the president's been talking about right here. As you can see, yes, you can see through these slats to the other side of the U.S.-Mexico border. But as we're walking along here, we're not seeing any kind of imminent danger. There are no migrants trying to rush toward this fence here in the McAllen, Texas area. As a matter of fact, there are some other businesses behind me along this highway. There's a gas station, Burger King, and so on. But no sign of the national emergency that the president has been talking about. As a matter of fact, it's pretty tranquil down here.
Yeah, just maybe, Mr. Acosta, things are tranquil because there's a wall there. Walls do work. I'm kind of agnostic on whether or not we need one across the entire border. I'm not convinced we need one necessarily across the entire border, but I think there are strategic places where it is definitely appropriate, and the Border Patrol wants wall or some kind of barrier there, steel slats there. I don't think we're going to have a huge concrete wall across the border, but I think physical barriers at certain points help funnel people to, because here's the thing. where there's physical barrier, the border patrol doesn't necessarily need to be there. So it allows them to stretch their resources more effectively. Um, so I think, definitely we need physical barriers, whether it's wall fencing, steel slats, whatever. In some spots, we can have drones and other things in other spots. Definitely, I think we need to bolster the number of Border Patrol agents, both in the southern border as well as in our northern border. So border security is definitely important. Um, but, oh, Mr. Acosta, just wonderful. Anyway, hey, moving on, I want to get to my discussion with State Senator Randy Feenstra. He is currently the chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. He is an assistant majority leader in the Senate. I don't have in front of me how long he's actually been in the Iowa Senate, but quite a while. He's a pretty popular guy, well liked among the caucus, I know, well liked among his constituents. He is, without further ado, here's my conversation with State Senator Randy Feenstra.
Hey, Randy, thank you for joining us on the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Shane. Thanks for having me on Caffeinated Thoughts. I've always enjoyed listening to it in the past, and I just greatly appreciate that you have me on today.
Not a problem. So I want to ask you a question that I ask every single candidate, whether it's a person running for president or a person running for city council. Why are you running for office? Why do you want to do this?
And what a great question, right? I mean, that should be the most important question you have. And this started over the last year, and it really came to a head after the election. My wife and I and family sat down, and we were really concerned about the things that were happening in the 4th District and what was being said, and also the voter turnout that happened in the 4th District. We saw a sharp decline from Republicans voting. Especially for the current congressman. And that's where we got together and we said, hey, let's take a look at what does it look like to run for Congress. And then we went out and we started talking with agricultural leaders and talking with business leaders and talking with other family and other people in the district. And it was just amazing to hear that there's just support for a new face and somebody that is principled and conservative to run, and that's the genesis of it, and that's where I decided to run, and I'm really excited about it.
Okay, so many of our listeners may not know who you are, so can you talk a little bit about your background and what you're doing now and your qualifications for office?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a lot of fun things in life. I started out as a assistant manager at Shield Sports Store in Sioux City, and then was the head of sales at the Foreign Candy Company for 8 years. I traveled a lot at that point. My wife and I sat down and said, we have young children, so let's look at a different occupation. So I became city administrator of Hull, one of the faster growing cities in Sioux County, and then sort of dipped my toes into politics and got into being the Sioux County treasurer, then got into running for the Iowa Senate. I've been an Iowa senator for the last 10 years, and through that time I've been working at a bank in their insurance arm, managing the insurance arm of Iowa State Bank. And just 2 years ago, Dordt College called and said, hey, you have a lot of business background, so we'd love to have you be one of our professors. So currently I'm a professor at Dordt College teaching business. So that's the background, and it's been quite a journey.
So Dordt is, they are Christian Reformed, right? Not the RCA?
That is correct, right.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
They're a Christian Reformed background, and we have Northwestern that is 9 miles away. They're Reformed, and we do a lot of things together and do things collectively.
Yeah, I just couldn't remember which denomination they belong to. Totally irrelevant to the topic. But
not a problem.
You'll find I sometimes ask irrelevant questions. So Congressman King responded to your primary challenge, and he quoted his his son Jeff, and he said you guys had a discussion. And I don't have the language in front of me, but basically said you told Jeff that you weren't going to run, that you love his dad. Is that true? Did you say that, or how did that conversation?
Yeah. So let me put it in context.
Okay.
So this was well over a year and a half ago, maybe even longer than that. I did tell his son Jeff that, hey, I would not run against your dad, and I enjoy what he's doing. And then as this time came forward, I manned up, and it was the last Saturday in December. Congressman King and I met. I think we met for about an hour and 45 minutes, and we had a great discussion. We had good conversation about myself running and about him and what he would like to do and so forth. And at the end of the day, it really came down to, hey, I'm going to run. So a little disingenuous, but because I told him out of the gate, and this wasn't blindsided by him in any means. I mean, we sat down and had a conversation before this all occurred.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a proponent of contested primaries. I think they're healthy for any political party. Whether it's it doesn't matter if I like the current incumbent or not. I think it keeps them, puts them on their toes. It encourages them to remain connected to the district, because we've seen incumbents that don't connect well with the district end up falling. I'm thinking of the former House Majority Whip, while the Republicans were still in the majority. Eric Cantor, everybody thought, oh, he's up and comer, but yeah, he wasn't paying attention to his district. So contested primaries are good.
Yeah, it creates good discourse. I mean, it creates conversation, and that's always good. Yep.
Right. So, should you be elected, I mean, how would you set yourself apart? I mean, what would a Congressman Feenstra look like?
So how I frame myself is I'm a very principled conservative leader, meaning that I want to get things done. I'm very passionate about driving home what needs to be done. So things like cutting taxes, which I did in the Iowa Senate, working with agriculture because we're number one in the world in the 4th District, protecting life, defending the Second Amendment. I mean, these are all things that we fight for, and we figure out ways to achieve them. And the great example is really protecting life in the heartbeat bill. We did that in the Iowa Senate. That's where it started, and there's a lot of us that stood fast and made that happen. Right now, there's other people that are taking that and saying they did it or whatever it might be. We actually took the votes. We actually did it. And those are things that you bring to Congress and say, all right, how do we get things done? How do we get a seat at the table? And if you don't have a seat at the table, you can never get nothing done. You can be a talking head all you want, but nothing gets done.
Right.
And that's the difference. That is the absolute difference, is that I want a seat at the table. I want to get things done. And that really comes by working with those around you and figuring out a way that you can produce fruits.
So right now, I mean, who knows what will happen in 2020 if the Republicans will gain the majority back? But just say you walk into a situation, you win win the primary, you win the election. It's pretty much given this will be the main contest, as we've seen in the past. Generally, I think I don't see Iowa 4th flipping blue anytime in the near future. But should you win your election, you come in and it's still Speaker Nancy Pelosi. In what ways do you think you could work with Democrats in order to accomplish or to get bills passed? What kinds of things do you see common ground on?
Right. So we had the same thing in the Iowa Senate when I came in 2008 and 9. There was 18 of us Republicans, and now look at it. Now there's 32 Republicans. So there's a couple of things you got to do. First of all, you got to work like crazy to make sure you get back in the majority. All right? Because if you want to get things done, you really got to be in the majority. But on the flip side, you also got to find common ground. Where do we find common ground? What's most important in our district? It's ag. what can we do to further promote ethanol? What can we further do to get the trade taken care of and the tariffs taken care of? I mean, these are all things that you need to be working with both sides and the president. I mean, when you're in the minority, then the best thing you can do is advocate for the president's policies, and whether that be protecting the border, building a wall and stuff. Hey, those are things that we can get behind and work with him on and so forth. So there's a lot of things you can do in the minority, but your eyes got to be set on getting yourself in the majority.
Right. So I assume by 2020 we'll be out of this government shutdown. So, but this keeps. I'm sure this is going to probably keep cropping back up, these situations where here again we're looking at passing continuing resolution and we got till this time midnight or the government's going to shut down. What's your view of government shutdowns, and where do you like, just taking for instance this particular one, even though it'll be resolved hopefully before you or Congressman King's reelected? So, or how do you think this was the right approach?
Yeah. So let's step back a minute. I look
Sure.
at President Trump and say, when he ran for office, he said, these are the things that I will get done, X, Y, Z, and whatever it might be. And he's checking them off as he goes. And one was creating a wall. Right now, he's in a position that he has one part of the legislature, one part of Congress that the Republicans are in the minority. So to get it done, his only option was a government shutdown, and that's what has happened. So, and he's standing firm, and I believe he'll get it done. But sometimes you have to lay all the cards on the table and say, all right, what are our options, and how can we effectively do this? Now, do I love shutdowns? No, it does hurt people. But at the end of the day, hopefully it resolves the problem. Hopefully we get the money for the wall.
Okay. Now, which leads me to think of immigration and the whole immigration reform debate. Do you think do you see room for compromise on immigration? I mean, I thought this particular government shutdown would be an opportunity for President Trump to come back and say, hey, Democrats, you want to do DACA? Let's do DACA in exchange for the wall. Is that something that you would be open to if you were elected?
Well, I think immigration. There are so many facets to immigration, whether there be DACA, whether there be a workers program, and all this stuff. I think we have to come with solutions, and we can yell and scream to the mountains, but that doesn't resolve the problem. Right? We've got to figure out how can we bring people in legally, and have them be workers in the 4th District. I mean, there's a lot of places, whether it be the dairies, to other agriculture areas, other manufacturing stuff, they desperately need workers. So what happens if we create a pool, all right, a pool of workers, and people sign up, and we vet them, and if they get through the vetted process, then a dairy can say, hey, I need 8 or 9 new workers. All right, these are vetted. Let's bring them in, and you as a business, you're responsible for them. You think back decades ago, that's what happened when people immigrated over. Even my great-great-grandparents that immigrated over, that's how they came over. And I think we got to get back to that. Now, the people that are here, we have to think of solutions. What can we do? And those are all conversations that need to be had.
Okay. So President Trump recently said, hey, we're going to pull our troops out of Syria. And then, also winding things down in Afghanistan. What's your view of first of all, our involvement in where should we be sending troops, and how should that be done, as well as do you agree with President Trump's actions?
I think it comes down to the experts. I mean, you have to believe in your military leaders and what they are telling you. What are they seeing? I mean, you can have many people in the stands saying, "Oh, this is what we should do," or that's what we should do. but it really comes down to what are the top people, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying? What are they coming up with? What is the best exit plan, and how do we make sure we prevent a vacuum that the Taliban comes back into that area? So there's a situation that you have to trust the top leadership, that they're making the best and wisest decisions for our country. But they also have to be validated, meaning that, all right, you trust, but you also have to validate. So if it's not working in 6 months, then changes have to be made.
Okay. Well, I mean, you had Secretary of Defense Mattis resign, and in his letter, President Trump liked to say he retired. He is retiring, but he actually resigned because of differences of opinion with the president mainly over Syria, and how we handle allies. Is that something we should be concerned about? I
think we have to see how it plays out. So again, it goes back to trust and validate.
Okay.
All right, so if we're pulling out of Syria, okay, that's okay, but what's going to happen? And I'm hoping that the Pentagon is watching that very closely, that there is not a vacuum, that all of a sudden the Taliban comes swooping back in. So I trust the president in the fact that if he wants to make that decision, okay, but I hope he's listening to others that say this is what needs to happen if this doesn't work.
Okay. It seems like he has backtracked a little bit as far as the extending they're looking for different. I can't remember the word for it, but yeah, they're not going to pull out necessarily immediately. So moving on here, nobody seems to be doing anything about the national debt, and I think that's probably one of the greatest national. That's one of our greatest national security threats, probably. Not probably, it is. How do you think we could tackle the national debt, and what would you propose if you were in election?
Yeah. First of all, you hit it on the head. I mean, it's probably the most important thing to national security, and it's important to my children. You just play this out in the next 20 to 30 years, and you can look at other European countries. What's happening over there? It's coming if we don't change things, and we have to start balancing the budget. That's where it starts. Right? You can't continue to spend more than you take in. Right? It doesn't work in the family budget, and it surely doesn't work in government. So that's number one. You have to balance the budget. Number two, you have to start growing the economy, which kudos to President Trump with the tax reform bill to give more dollars, to put more dollars in a person's pocket so the economy can grow. When the economy grows, you're going to have more taxes coming in, which can reduce the budget if you don't spend more. So it's a dual effect. Right? You can start getting yourself out of debt, but you need a growing economy, and you have to have a balanced budget. And not only a balanced budget, but start actually taking an axe to the budget and saying, all right, these are things that just got to get pulled out of the budget. It's got to happen. It's absolutely got to happen. Now, being on the taxing, the head of the taxing committee in the state of Iowa, I get it. And I would love, more than anything, to be the head of the taxing committee at the federal level. I mean, that's where I live, and that's what I love to do, and I would love to take that on as a challenge.
Okay. Obviously you'd have to, in seniority to be the chairman, but you're going to try to get on the House Ways and Means Committee.
Right. It takes time, right? I mean, that's how you have to create a way to have a seat at the table.
Right.
And those are things that haven't happened in the past. But if we want to have an effective fourth district and a voice in the fourth district, that's what has to happen. You've got to create a way to have a seat at the table.
Okay. How entitlement reform? I mean, we're talking about getting the federal budget, balanced, and the discretionary spending is just like a drop in the bucket when you compare it to all the entitlement spending, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, whether it's Social Security. So that's it, to get something to happen really to knock down the national debt. That needs to be addressed. How do you reform Social Security? How do you take on Medicare, Medicaid, respecting the commitments made to people who are currently receiving those benefits, but yet making sure they're solvent and we can continue to keep them funded down the road.
Exactly. And this is probably, you talk about security, but this is another extremely serious problem. You think about it. As a baby boomers retire, and you look at the actuarial tables that show where Social Security is going and where Medicare is going, we have some serious problems ahead of us. And these are people, right, that put in money for the last 40 years into these programs. And now all of a sudden we're looking at going, oh boy, in the next 20 years, we're not, and even less than that. I think the last report I saw was 13 years. That we're going to run out of money, that we're not going to have the money to continue to fund these programs. So the first thing you got to do is, again, I do everything with data. You got to look at the actuarial tables and say, what do we need to do to make sure that we have a sound Social Security program and a sound Medicare program? And what we don't do is continue to say, oh, well, we're going to add things to it. We're going to add national health care to this. And it just perpetuates the problem. We can't do that. So you start working through, all right, how do we make it actually sound? And then how do we sustain it? What do we need to do with the young generation X, generation Y, Z, you name it? What do we do with them to make sure that sustainability occurs for the next generation?
Okay. So I just want to also kind of shift gears. You're a huge Second Amendment proponent. President Trump has basically ordered the Department of Justice to create a rule to basically amend how they enforce the National Firearms Act, which includes bump stocks now. Is that something you agree with? Is that the right approach, or is that a overreach of executive power, in your opinion?
Yeah, we have to be really careful with the overreach of executive power. Most of the presidents have used it. If you look in the past history, I mean, presidents have used the executive power for a tremendous amount of things. I'll be the first one to tell you that I think Congress needs to decide the rule of law in society, and especially when it comes to the Second Amendment. I am fearful of what has taken place and the rhetoric that has occurred when it comes to gun control and so forth. I mean, we live in the 4th District. We love to hunt. We love to have guns and so forth. And you know what? We are a very safe district. We really are. And to start regulating that becomes a real concern. I am a true Second Amendment supporter. I am a carry supporter. That's what needs to happen, and it's one of the things in our Constitution. And if it's in the Constitution, then we shouldn't start taking carve-outs of getting rid of some of these things. And that's what really concerns me. I think the best way to handle, obviously there's concerns out there with mental health and stuff. Yeah, those are things that we can look at and then we can get proactive on and so forth. But as my dad always told me, it's not the person, it's not the gun that kills somebody, it's the person, it's their mental capacity. So, I think we always have to remind ourselves of that.
Okay. Gosh, I had a question in mind and I'm like, lost it. That never happens. That never happens. So, oh gosh, what was I going to ask you next? It was related. Okay, well, let me just I'll shift gears here. Should you be elected, what would be like your top five priorities, things that you like want to work on immediately?
All right. So the top priorities, first of all, and hopefully this is done before I get elected, but hey, we got to secure the border, right? That's number one. Number two is balancing our budget. You talk about what's the most important thing of security of our nation. It's the budget. We got to balance it. Number three is simplifying our tax code. Again, I'm very passionate about that. We have the most complicated tax code in the world, and we got to simplify that. I also want to be the strongest voice for ag. In the 4th District, we are the biggest ag area in the world, and we have to have a voice at the table. When the last farm bill came down, we didn't have a congressman sitting at the table. Was not part of that, and that just can't occur. So I will be very passionate on two things. Number one, on tax policy, and number two, agriculture. And everything else follows, meaning job creators, helping reduce business regulation, and so forth. But it all starts with reducing taxes, balancing the budget, and then have a strong agricultural voice.
Okay, I finally remembered my question. Basically, we've had instances of prominent conservatives or who have been deplatformed from Twitter and Facebook, and we've had obviously instances where Google and Facebook and Twitter have censored conservative voices compared to more often compared to liberal voices. And Congresses have held hearings. What are your views of what is the appropriate role for Congress in dealing with stuff like this?
Well, I think it goes back to the Constitution. Right? I'm a constitutionalist. That we have First Amendment. We have the right for freedom of speech. So sometimes we don't like what the other side is saying, but
Right.
We have freedom to say it. And the minute you start saying, well, we don't like that, so we don't think that should be on the internet or wherever it might be, that's wrong. Right? I think both sides play out here. I don't like a lot of things that I read on the internet, but it's called freedom of speech.
Right.
And now I am a full supporter of that freedom, and
Okay.
I think we have to embrace that.
Yeah, I agree, but some would say for one thing, this isn't Congress passing a law restricting freedom of speech. This is a private company doing that.
Yep.
So how would you drawing that distinction?
But it goes back to right. It goes back to me. It goes back to Congress. I think Congress would say, all right, this is when you have Google and when you have search engines and you name it that can dictate what's on these platforms, and yet the whole world uses. Right? Mm-hmm. We're all in this together. Right? They shouldn't have the ability to dictate what's on that site or not, because they have become a global communication network. Right? They are the network of the world. So again, to me, it infringes speech when you have large companies like Google that says, or Alphabet now, or they call it Alphabet, right? Mm-hmm. that says, hey, we are going to take some of these things off. No, that should not be the case, and I think that's where Congress got to step in and said, you know what, there's some things that we don't like on it, but it's freedom of speech.
Okay. Just want to wrap up by asking a couple things. One, could you, putting on your state senator hat, you're the chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. Can you give us a preview of what you guys are going to be working on this session?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited about this session. I'm going to be hard at it. So last year we did income tax reform. We did income tax reduction. So this year it is property tax reform and reduction. I've had so many people, constituents, tell me that their property taxes continue to skyrocket and it's out of control. And I think it's just time that we look at the system. Again, you talk about a system that's very complicated. Our property tax system is very complicated. And you look at your bill and you say, okay, what are all these levies and what's going on here? That's got to be changed. So that's going to be my number one top priority. Number two is, since we passed the income tax bill last year, there has to be some modifications and changes to make it clearer and better. Been working with a lot of accountants and a lot of people within the taxing body to clean up some of the things that were created last year. And then, there's other big issues like mental health. And I think we've got to wrap our arms around it and figure out a way to further prevent some of the issues that are occurring and be more proactive in mental health. I have the Mental Health Institute in Cherokee, Iowa, that's in my district, and I go there. I mean, I'm there probably once a year or more, and I see this and say, all right, something different's got to be done. All right, we as a state can do better for those that can't help themselves.
Okay. A question I should have asked you earlier, actually. You're very pro-life, and you got obviously a solid pro-life record in the Iowa Senate. What bills would you like to see advanced at the federal level that have been just kind of they've been on hold. We haven't been able to get anything accomplished significantly.
Here's the thing. Congressman King did not get the heartbeat bill done at the congressional level. That's number one for me. It's got to happen. Now, my hope is that the Supreme Court takes up, if the Iowa Supreme Court says it's non-constitutional, which I hope they don't, but if it does, I hope then the Supreme Court can act on the Iowa's heartbeat bill. That's how important this bill was, and we got passed in the legislature last year. But I want to get it passed at the federal level. It's got to happen. And how do you do that? Right? You don't put yourself on an island. You work with everybody, and you get collaborative, and you make it happen. Now, full disclosure, yes, the House has to be in the majority at the time, and
right.
But that's one of the issues. We cannot be afraid of our own shadow when it comes to balancing the budget, when it comes to the heartbeat bill, when it comes to the Second Amendment. Sometimes we have legislators or congresspeople that get scared of their own shadow. We can't have that. We got to be very bold and work and get these things accomplished.
Okay. I mentioned earlier, I sometimes ask irrelevant questions. Well, it's maybe irrelevant to the campaign, but very relevant to Caffeinated Thoughts. What's your favorite coffee? What's your favorite coffee drink?
Coffee mocha with a little bit of chocolate mix in it. That's always good. It's sort of funny you ask that. I periodically go to different coffee shops, and you always got to try something different, don't you? I mean, you always got to try something different in your coffee. So it's fun for me to go to different coffee shops and try different things. So just like on your podcast, and just like on Caffeinated Thoughts, you have many different people that come on and different aspects that you take. It's just like coffee.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for your time. Where can people learn more about your campaign?
Hey, Shane. First of all, thanks so much for having me on. I think the world of you. You can anybody that would like to see what I'm doing or contribute to my campaign can go to www.feenstraforcongress.com. Again, www.feenstraforcongress.com.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you. You bet. You too.
Bye-bye.
And that concludes today's episode of the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you happen to be listening to this podcast somewhere other than on our website, please make sure to go check out caffeinatedthoughts.com. Again, that's caffeinatedthoughts.com, CAFFEINTED thoughts. You just Google Caffeinated Thoughts, and it'll show up at the top of your search screen as well. Please also be sure to follow us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. We'd love to stay connected with you. You can sign up for our emails as well, and that way you don't miss a single update. Also, you can listen to the Caffeinated Thoughts podcast on your favorite podcast app. We are currently on Podbean, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play. We are on Spotify, SoundCloud, and who am I missing? Stitcher as well. So if there's a podcast app that we're missing that you'd like to see us on, please shoot me an email, shane@caffeinatedthoughts.com, and let me know what that is, and we'll try to make that happen. Hey, have a very great weekend. Just a wonderful weekend. Until next time, my friends, this is Shane Vander. Take care.